Today in this video, I will talk about chapter 11 about communications. I assume that you have read the topic before you watch the video, so I will skip several explanations because I perceive that as easily to be understood. So please let me know if you have any concern or if you have any questions regarding the topics that I have skipped. This is the learning objectives, but let me skip it. So let's just discuss directly about what we will talk today, which is about communications. And we will talk first about the functions and process of communications. Okay, communications in organizations context consist or serve five major functions. The first one, management, feedback, emotional sharing, persuasions, and the last but not least is information exchange. Of course, the last one is very self-explanatory, but I will be focusing on the four functions that I first mentioned. Okay, management, feedback, emotional sharing, and persuasions. So we have to manage the organizations. That's why you enroll in business management study program in Atmajaya. So the first functions of communications is about to manage the member because you are the leader. You as a manager is the leader. So how do communications actually serve as a way to manage your member? Because by communicate, you actually give a message that you are the hierarchy, you are the highest hierarchy, or you are the higher hierarchy, and then you have means to do or to give a formal guidelines. Formal guidelines may be do and don'ts in these organizations is a formal guidelines. For example, Atma Jaya has a formal guideline to wear what polite polite shirt or polite dress code when you attend public lecture. That's a formal guidelines, and then you have to fill pra-KRS every single semester. That's a formal guidelines. And also me as a lecturer in this class also have a formal guideline in the formal syllabus because I actually detail the class rules in there. So I have a formal guidelines, and I also establish a formal authorities because of what? Because I am the leader of this class. Okay, and then communications is also a way to actually describe the job or give the job descriptions to your member for because of what? Because there is no way that you cannot there is no way that you can actually give job descriptions without communicating it. Remember, communicating is not only oral communications but also written communications and non-verbal communications. So when you actually give the job description in printed form, you actually also communicate with your member. It's not only about talking, but also about writing and reading. But communication is also used to prevent work group teasing or harassing because it's quite prevalent in the group context that group teasing and group harassing is everywhere actually. So you as a manager or you as a leader has to communicate that this kind of thing is not acceptable. That's the dons in the or that's the dons in the organizations. That's why. And then in the process of organizations work, there will be result that your member has to submit to you, and then can give feedback by giving maybe an oral feedback, verbal feedback, or maybe a written feedback. It can be also, but it can be also non-verbal cues about whether you like their work or not. For example, your facial expressions is non-verbal one. It can be also perceived as a feedback from you to your members. But remember, communication second functions is to give feedback. Feedback about what? Feedback about the job of the member of that organizations, and also their performance in doing their job, and also their performance in overall context in that organizations. And then communications is also about emotional sharing, because what? Because we are not robot, because we are not machines, so we have to share our emotions. But in the work context, do we have to share our emotions? Yes. Because of what? Because we have to give empathy, or we have to empathize with the member of the organization. So what? Because they need to be understood, and we as a leader has to be able to give sympathy or maybe empathy to them, and also share. For sometimes we have to convince someone, and we are not able to convince someone logically every single time, and we actually can do emotional sharing of feeling, and then maybe your member will be more what, engaged, or will be more believe in you when you do this kind of thing. And this emotional sharing is not only from you to your member, which is downward communications, no, but it can be also from your member to you, which is an upward communications. Okay, beside emotional sharing, communications is also able, or is also can be functioned as a persuasive, or persuasions can be used as a persuasions. Because of what? Because you have to persuade your member to do their job well, so your organizations will be what, having a good performance in the long run. That's why communications is also served as persuasions means. And then the last thing about communications, or the last functions of communications, is about information exchange, which is very self-explanatory. Because of what? Because when you communicate, actually you give or you send a message, or you receive a message, and then that message is actually contain informations, and then you have to do it in a formal way, and in informal way in organizations, to what, to exchange information. For example, you as a member of this class will actually communicate with me about the task that I have given to you. Because of what? Because when I actually talking about the assignment which is due next week, for example, I give you information that there is a task that due next week, and you will understand that also. That's actually the functions of communications as an information exchange. And then please remember that when I talk about communications, we actually exchange informations, or exchange message. Ex- um, and then in the communications process, there is a sender of that message, and there is a receiver of that message. There is a sender and there is a receiver. But in a process of communications, sender and receiver, the one who will be the sender and the one who will be the receiver, can exchange their role very frequently. For example, when you actually talking to someone, when you talk, you actually the sender. But after your friend receiving your message and then they talk back to you, so the role is exchanged, right? You will become the receiver and then she will become the sender. And then the sender actually has when you look at this framework, when you look at the exhibit 11-1, sender will be having this kind of message that she want to send, and then she will encode the message. How she will encode the message? By, for example, talking is the way to encode the message, because of what, in when we talk we actually what, we actually create a sentence and then we articulate that sentence in, or not in, but by our mouth. That's an encoding. But also if you want to send a message but you cannot do it orally, maybe you will do it by, for example, WhatsApp or iMessage. You actually writing and then that writing is encoding activity. But it can be also by non-verbal cues. For example, you are that annoyed. You do not type that you are annoyed. You do not talk. You do not tell your friend that you are annoyed, but you give this gesture, face expression that you actually annoyed. So you actually encode the message in non-verbal ways. The other example that I can give to you, for example, if you are hungry and you start to touch your belly or tummy or stomach, you start to touch that area, so you actually encode the message that you are hungry. But do the receiver receive the message as what you intended? That's a very different context. So actually you want to say something, but is the receiver understand what you actually saying? Is a very different context, because sometimes we have what we call as a noise. Cultural barriers and also language barrier can be served as a noise also. For example, you are not good at talking in English and then you speak English in front of the class, but no, because so your English is not that fluent, so nobody actually understand your English. That's the noise. And then, for example, you talk to someone from overseas, and then you give this verbal or non-verbal cues. I will say non-verbal cues about what. When you want to call someone in Indonesia, you can use your hand, right? By giving, by what, by flapping your hand. In Indonesia, when you flapping your hand, when you what give um, these motions of hand will be perceived as you calling someone. But in other country, for example in Australia, when you give the exact motions like that, it is not a cue to call someone, but it is a cue to actually dismiss someone from that room. So there is noise. For, so I want you to remember that what? That when you communicate, there will be a noise. But the noise is high or not. The noise can also be, for example, um, loud environment. It can be also, the noise is also can be um, the visual block. Also the noise can also be internet connections. It can be that way. So you have to be smart and you have to choose the channel well, because every channel will have its own noises. Okay, every channel will have its own noises. For example, you want to use Zoom. For example, there's a channel actually. But channel like Zoom will have internet connections problem as a noise. You want to have a direct channel by speaking directly to someone. That's a channel also, but there will be a noise also in that kind of situations. So in organization context, we have three types of communications based on the position of the sender and the receiver. For example, if I am the leader, if I'm the manager and you are the member or you are the what, the staff, the a very common staff, and then I'm the supervisor, and then I talk to you in a very formal manners about your job. I do the downward communications. For example, you have to do this, you have to do this. So I signed a goal. I assign a goals. You have to do this, so you have to achieve this. That's a to assign goals and also give instructions. And then also I communicate about policies and procedures when I talk about class do and don'ts, and then provide feedback when I actually listen to your presentations and then give the feedback. But remember this, when you in the positions of leader and you do these downward communications and you communicate about the decisions that you have made, you have to explain why you make that decisions. It's not about giving instructions only, but also giving like a legitimacy why you choose that options. Next, we have upward communications, usually for giving feedback, giving like informations, giving update for the supervisor. But remember this, when you do this kind of thing, when you do this kind of upward, very formal communications with your supervisor, also me, communicate in short sentence, not paragraph. Communicate in headlines so I can read it easily and I can understand it easily. It's also working when you communicate with your future supervisor or with your future CEO, because CEO will not having so much time to read every single paragraph of yours. So you have to communicate effectively and shortly. And then we have what we call as lateral communications, is communications between staff, between members. Some of organizations do not want this kind of thing of happens. Some, because of what? Because they do not want to trigger gossip or maybe a very a very inaccurate information to happen. That's why maybe some of the organizations really prohibit this kind of communications happen. But nowadays, formal or lateral communications is what is kind of free because of what? Because it creates also a social bonding between the employee actually. But it also can ignite dysfunctional conflicts also. It can be, there is a plus, there is a minus. Remember, in this context we talk about very formal communications. We have downward, we have upward, we have lateral communications. But in organization context, we have what we call as network. Network is how the information is conveyed. We have chain, we have wheel, we have all channels. For Atma Jaya, we have this chain kind of network. So the director will give you some information to the dean, and the dean will inform to other member of the organizations. That's how. That's how Atma Jaya works. But we have also wheels. For example, this class having a wheel type of formal communications, because the instructor and also the sorts of informations about how we will conduct this class is from me. Is from me. So everybody will have to ask me, or will have to read my message about how will how I will conduct this class for this week. That's a real communications. But also we have all channel communications where every members and every supervisor will have right and also will have a freedom to communicate by themselves. Remember this kind of networks will have their plus side and minus side. I will not explaining about all of this, but this is the plus and the minus one. For example, the chain one will have the information flow in terms of speed very moderate. It's not fast, it's not slow, but it's moderate. Compared to other network, it's slower. Actually, it is slower. Because of what? Because you have to wait for the rector to give instruction to the dean and wait for the dean to give instructions to the members, which is very like taking time sometimes. That's for the speed. Accuracy is high, but for the chain the accuracy is high. But for all channel, because there is no formal information flow, so actually that kind of thing can dilute the quality of the informations. Okay, let's move to the informal communications. In informal communication, we will have grab find. Like I said before, informal communications nowadays very important to create what? To give moral and also social bond of that employee to the organizations. But the downside of the informal communications is about emergence of gossips and rumors. So, okay, how do we deal with that kind of gossips and rumors? How we actually offset or clarify rumors and gossips? First of all, you have to share the informations that you have, but also informations that you do not have. For example, I do know that actually we will have loss for this semester, for example, but I do not know whether we will have change or not in organization system because of that loss. So you share the informations that you have, but at the same time you also acknowledge yourself that you actually as a leader do not know some of the informations. And then second, you have to explain. Okay, you manager the best, not the best, I mean, um, the main job task of a manager is to decide. And when you decide something, please explain why you decide that kind of thing, why you decide to choose A, not B. Because of what? Because when you only decide but not explained, people will speculate. When people speculate, gossip and rumors will emerge. And then when you hear a rumors, please respond. But please do not respond with a very strong wording, but you have to verify whether the rumor is true or not. So actually you can actually also, when the rumor is not only about you, but the rumor is about the other employee, you have to remember this, that every story has two different kind of story at least. That's why the last sentence in the number 3 is make certain to gather all sides of story. Remember that, because you, the leader, has to give objective evaluations about something. And then when the rumor or the gossip become too big, you can also invite the employee to actually discuss about things. For example, there is a gossip about the turnover. But actually, as a leader, as a manager, I do not see that kind of thing will be happened. But why? That kind of gossip is spreading fastly in these organizations, and then you want to discuss this thing. I'm not discuss this thing with a very open-minded mindset. You can do it also. Remember this, when we do the oral communications, there is three type of communications: oral communications, written communications, and non-verbal communications. Oral communications is happened when you speak, when you use language and you use your mouth to actually speak. It can be in a very offline, in a very conventional meeting. You sit in a one big table, can be, but also due to this pandemic, video conferencing is becoming a new normal right now, or it can be also from the telephone. Then we have the written communications, letters, PowerPoint, email, instant messaging is very self-explanatory. And then we have also non-verbal communications. Non-verbal communications can be your facial expression, your hand gesture, your body gesture is also non-verbal communications. Remember this, when you communicate with someone, actually the receiver will receive two kind of things. The first one is the message from your oral or written communications, but when you do it personally, they will also see the non-verbal cues when you speak to them. For example, you speak to them with a frowned face, so they will perceive that you actually do not like to talk with them, and maybe you actually do not really mean what you say. It can be that way. So okay, this is a very US research. And then let's say next, this is the non-verbal communications. Like I said before, body movement and even intonations. Although, for example, although you speak actually, but the intonations of yours will give different meaning of that sentence. Remember that intonations is considered as non-verbal because that is not a sentence, that is not a verb, that is not a word. That's why intonations, although actually intonations is produced by the mouth, but it is not a verbal communications. Remember this is very English based example, but here's the thing. There is a stress when you actually talking, you stress words or maybe some words, right? But where you stress the word will make the meaning different. For example, when you stress the word you in this sentence, why don't I take you to the dinner? What it meant is I was going to take someone else because I emphasize on you. Kenapa bukan kamu? So actually you emphasize that. But when I actually emphasize the word I, why don't I take you to the dinner? Actually I emphasize on me. Kok bukan saya? Kok makanya bukan sama saya? Gitu loh. Seperti gitu. Tapi saya nggak akan mencontohkan semua, but that's how. In where you emphasize or stress the word will give different meaning. And then remember this, when you talk to someone, especially in a offline manner, in a direct manner, and also um, physically presence in there, you have to know that physical distance is also matters. Do not be too close, but do not be too far away from them. but the proper spacing between culture is very different from one to another culture. So, okay, like I said before, that in communications processes, we will have channels. We have myriad of channels, I mean many channels, but the choice of the channels is depend on the informations that you want to convey. You want to convey a very simple informations or very complicated informations, it can be that way, but the choice of that channel will also dictate the effectiveness of your communications effort. So please remember that we have several channels. For example, you can actually announce the informations by email, by voicemail, by creating letters, by giving a pre-recorded speech, for example, but also you can also have a discussions, video conference, live speeches, face-to-face confirmations. It can be that way. Here's the thing. There is a low channel. There is a channel that have low richness, and there is a channel that have a high richness. It depends on the channels of your choice, but it also depends on the information that you want to convey. For example, face-to-face confirmations will have a high richness level, but maybe it will be what? Resource demanding, because face-to-face confirmations you have to save a lot of energy spend to spend and save and spend a lot of energy to having a conversations with someone. But if the information is that big, you have to do or you have to choose the channel. But if the information is only about, for example, um, weekend or for example holiday, you can do it by emails. But if the information is about firing someone, you cannot do it by email, something like that. So you have to choose the channel very carefully. This is like I said before. For example, if the information is quite lengthy and complex, you can actually do the written communications. For example, you send a letter because what? Because actually, when you send a letter, the receiver will be able to read it twice or thrice instead of you actually speaking by yourself. But it very depend on the context and also very depend on the receiver also, whether they actually able to read comprehensively or not. And also, when you do written communications, mind your language, mind your coherence, and mind your grammar. Like I said before, when I talk about richness and also choice of communications channel, richness and choice of communications, I talk about professionalism also, and also when you talk to someone in a formal way, the audience of that communications effort is actually your employee or your member of the organizations. That's why please use a good grammar, use a good dictions, especially in a written context. And then I will discuss the rest of the communications topic in next week.